the main guarantor of the security of the Marcoses was really the United States. And we had, and as I wrote in my article, the Biden was very close to Marcos, and Marcos basically gave Biden what he wanted, which was more military control, military bases in the Philippines. Now, basically, the subtext there was that it was Washington's endorsement, that really was the central thing that kept the Marcoses in power, because the Philippine military, as I said, is a creation of the United States. It's never going to go against the um, the wishes of the United States with respect to who to support. And Malacanang was being supported by Biden. Now that's what's happening now is that is questionable, if whether or not the Marcoses or Bongbong is going to enjoy the same level of support from Trump. And this is
Why
why
would you
I
say
think,
that? Why would you say that? Trump was very good. How is Imelda, my great friend? I mean,
yeah, but that's Trump,
Marco Rubio. I mean, some of the people who are gonna run his daily affairs. I don't know about Trump's brain. Once in a while, he might say something crazy. But the people are gonna run it. Whether it's Hackseth, whether it's Marco Rubio, these are your traditional China hawks, right? And these are people who are gonna double down on countries like the Philippines as a kind of a spear of the as a tip of the spear pointing at China, isn't
well,
it?
I basically this is, I think, where I would say we stand back a bit, because if you remember, Trump said, for instance, that he would not waste one American life on those rocks in the South China Sea. And Clarita Carlos again reminded his former boss about this. But I think what we need to see here is that uh, although Trump is very much engaged politically, I mean economically, I mean he's going to carry out the trade war vis-a-vis China, and carry out the technological war against China. I don't think that he's going to be essentially um, carry on the same kind of confrontational military confrontation of China that Biden has. Remember, in his first term, Trump was mainly engaged with economic confrontation with China. But the military confrontation was really the one that Biden introduced into the whole equation. And it's a very fluid situation, because Trump has been known to tell the South Koreans and the Japanese, that hey, they have to pay for their defense. It's not They cannot just automatically rely on the United States for that. And he's also told that to Taiwan. And so, what I'm just trying to say at this point is that we can make no assumptions about the Trump's Asia Pacific policy beyond, of course, that he's going to impose tariffs on everybody, including the Philippines. Okay, and not
Even
to
that is not sure. I mean, maybe even that is not sure. Although I personally met the person who took over Lighthizer job. He is a Lighthizer protege, and we were in a forum last year, and I, in front of everyone, asked, should we de-risk also from Trump? Because Trump is as threatening as China. And the next thing he ends up as a treasury sorry, the trade
yeah.
representative. But going back to that, no. My point, Walden, is I agree with you that with Trump, really no one knows. I
Oh,
don't.
yeah.
Own brain knows what he's gonna do, right? So there's always gonna be this shadow of, is he gonna cut the deal with China? I mean, is he gonna do some corrupt deal? My point is the best bet we have in terms of credible prognostication is to look at the composition of people who are going to occupy top positions of government in the Pentagon and State Department. And to be frank, Walden, I see continuity from Trump 1 to Biden 1 and Trump 2 more than rupture. I mean, my sense here is that they may be even more aggressive in pushing us to toe the line. Just as much as we don't know what Trump himself will do. I'm talking about the
Mhm.
team, the administration. In
Yeah.
fact, my worry is we'll be even more forced to go tough on the Taiwan question, to go tough on the South China
Mhm.
Sea question, and that we our room for maneuver will be further squeezed. But again, I understand what you're saying. What you're saying is that at least during Biden, there was this understanding that, Marcos, don't worry, you're doing what we want. We're gonna be with you. And I think that was very important for Marcos to feel
Sure.
confident, relaxed, and all.
Mhm.
Now, obviously, the other side of the equation, Walden, here is China. To what degree do you think that the Dutertes are a proxy of China or not? And are we seeing a double Cold War here? Duterte versus Marcos Cold War, not yet open civil war, and also how the U.S.-China Cold War is affecting that equation.
Yes. Just but before we leave the China thing, I think
Sure, sure.
we just have to realize that there's a very strong isolationist base in the Make America Great Again, base that elected Trump to power. And that's something that Trump has to listen to. They don't want foreign adventures. They think that focusing on foreign military engagements has really cost the United States a great deal of its resources and has contributed to the deindustrialization of the United States. We're talking about okay. Look at what happened during the first Trump administration, Richard. Uh, which is why I don't think we should just look at the personalities of people or their rhetoric. Trump tore up the Trans-Pacific Partnership that Obama and the Republicans and Democrats wanted. He negotiated the withdrawal of the United States from Afghanistan. Um, and he was going to invite the Taliban to Camp David to sign the agreement, but people told him that's going too far. Okay. Third is he crossed the demilitarized zone and patted Kim Jong Un on the back. And I think what I'm trying to say here, there is a reason why in South Korea and Japan and not only them, but in NATO, there is a very real fear that we are facing, that they are facing, the
Abandonment.
United States is facing this, that they're facing disengagement from critical areas of the world. And my sense is that the rhetoric of people like Rubio around China will not necessarily uh, reflect what they will do under Trump, because let's face it, these people really, in terms of their political strength, really just comes from endorsement from Trump. They can easily just as change their rhetoric as to fit what Trump wants. And basically, I think we've got to realize here that there is a strong base represented by J.D. Vance, which is a very isolationist base that basically
Tucker
says,
Carlson.
hey,
Tucker
too
Carlson.
much.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
also Tucker Carlson, I think, who played an
yeah,
important role to make sure
yeah,
JD Vance is there. There are a couple of people there. But I would also say JD
yeah,
Vance's former boss, people like Thiel, right, are very invested in the arms and defense industry. As we speak, they're
sure.
providing ammunitions to Israel's
Mhm,
operations last time I checked.
mhm,
Now, I
sure.
completely understand that uh, there is a kind of retrenchment, let's say,
Mhm,
sub movement within the MAGA movement, and it
mhm,
remains to be seen which faction comes on top. I'm just looking at the appointments. I'm looking at the imperial inertia. I'm just having a hard time seeing anyone short of Bernie Sanders doing a proper isolationism. My fear with Trump
mhm,
is that he's such a hodgepodge of, confused ideas that in
mhm,
the end of the day, maybe the more hawkish, because the way I see it, Walden, is this way. He wants to get out of Ukraine because Ukraine is not important to him. Rightly, he doesn't want to pick a war again in the Middle East, especially with a power like Iran, because my goodness, that will be horrific for everyone. But China is just so successful technologically, militarily, everything, that we see even in the American public, there is a recognition that China is emerging as a peer of America. And a part of me wonders, I mean, Walden, you know US more than me. You were educated there, you spent decades there. A part of me, I don't think Americans will ever accept not being number one and that China is knocking at their door, or at least That's their perception. And in that sense, even a so-called isolationist America may not be involved in Ukraine or in Gaza or Lebanon or against Iran, but they cannot. I just don't see how they can ignore China, seeing how bipartisan the so-called China threat is. I mean, for me, it's not so-called, but obviously for progressives in general, it's much more so-called than real. That is where I'm coming from. But Walden, I do not disagree with you that if you look at Tucker Carlson, J.D. Vance, I mean, these people are saying, let's rebuild America, let's rebuild the Rust
Yeah.
Belts, let's rebuild our industry and manufacturing, let's take care of our own people, for heaven's sake. Why are we spending trillions of dollars on these misadventures? So I
That's
think
in fact what the one guy that in Europe that Trump respects a lot is Orban, the strongman in Hungary. And that's precisely what he said. That he said that, okay, here is what Trump's going to do. And this is, I've talked to Trump, and what he really wants is to focus on Fortress America. Basically, rebuild the United States, reindustrialize it, um, set up high walls, tariffs, uh, set up walls against migrants, and don't engage in any sort of multilateral engagements where uh, don't engage with NATO and that sort of thing. And if you're gonna strike unilaterally. So I think we're really up for my sense, Richard, is this that Trump one couldn't really do what he wanted to do because there were still a lot of globalists there, especially the defense secretary Mattis, whatever. I think what you're going to see now is that the globalists are going gone, and the Chinese are gone, and what he has is just a set of obedient people that
yeah,
will respond
yeah,
to his
loyalty.
instincts. Yeah. So I'm just trying to say that yes, he's unpredictable, but let's not also realize that there are a set of forces that are forcing him to concentrate on the United States and on building a fortress America. So and the allies of the United States are rightfully worried about what's going to happen at this point. But coming back to the Philippines, my point is that um, the automatic security that was provided to the Marcoses by their alliance with Biden is cannot be taken for granted at this point. I mean, sure, there's House Imelda and all of that, but that's Trump, right? But basically, Trump also knows that you know the Marcoses, Harris, and Biden were very close. Okay, and he doesn't like that. Okay, I mean, this sort of closeness is not something that's going to endear these people to Trump. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that we're probably going to. The point is this: security provided by total support from the United States can no longer be taken for granted by the Marcoses. I think we're now up to a fairly fluid period. The point that I'm trying to say is that the signals to the Philippine military and to other forces within the Philippines is becoming more ambiguous at this point in time. So long as the Philippine military felt that the United States was in full support of the Marcoses, they wouldn't move against the Marcoses. Right now, and I think Duterte has realized this. His veiled, well, it wasn't even veiled, call, for the to the generals to help to intervene because of the so-called fractured governance in the Philippines. I think the results of the U.S. elections had something to do with that. I think it's now become more fluid in terms of the signals that are being given to the military. So that's what I'm trying to say is that you're entering a more unpredictable period, and it's not automatic that the Marcoses hold the cards, in this conflict. I would say that before the U.S. elections, I think that they held it. the cards. They had the upper hand. Afterwards, I right now I'm not sure that they have that.
Well, I'm looking at Jill Biden's interaction with Trump. I saw, Biden's interaction. They seem to be doing very well together. I think Biden is so pissed at being thrown under the bus, and maybe this Kamala loss after all is, you know,
Yeah.
politicians are politicians. All I can say is our fellow Ilocano BBM Walden. I don't think he will lack in schmoozing power. I think if there are OGs in schmoozing, it will be the Marcoses. So let's see how the Marcoses will schmooze and insinuate themselves into the Trump world. Let's see how things are going to move forward on that front. But I take your point that Trump is Trump, right? There could be rupture, there could be doubling down, and that
Mhm.
opening in itself creates some. No, the reason I'm telling this, Walden, is because the DDS, the Duterte supporters, are really banking on Trump rescuing Duterte. I don't know where that logic comes from, but their idea is that because Duterte is anti-globalist and Trump is anti-globalist, they essentially have a populist international. I don't know, maybe you can put Viktor Orban and all of that there. I generally find that ridiculous, but I do agree with you that that maybe Trump will throw everyone under the bus, and then that opens up possibilities. Now, Walden, what about the China side of this equation? How do you see the China hand? Because as powerful as the US is, China is also a very powerful country. I've been in different parts of the world, and even in Eastern Europe, they talk about China's influence there. I think China even has policing power in some of the Eastern European countries. Now, I'm not saying that they're crazy level US invading
Mhm.
countries. Thankfully, they're not there, or that is not there yet. But this is their region. This is what they consider as their backyard, and the Chinese are very influential in ASEAN and Southeast Asia. How do you see them? How do you see the China Duterte nexus?
Well, I think that the Duterte will really play the China card here, and I think if it's but at the same time they'll play it, but Xi Jinping will not necessarily support them. I think Xi Jinping is going to see this as a fluid period, and let's see what happens. I mean, he's a real politic kind of guy. But in terms of China, I think that the aim of the United States to be able to reindustrialize is facing a lot of difficulties at this point in time. And so basically, I would say that becoming number one economically is going to be a tough slug at this point. I mean, China now accounts for something like 28% of global GDP, and the United States is only about 14%. And although China is facing some economic difficulties at this point in time, nevertheless, the momentum is with them. And they've already made breakthroughs
Trade,
in
right?
terms of advanced.
Sorry, you were referring to trade and manufacturing, right? Because as a share of global GDP, US is still number one at around.
Yeah, no, no. Yeah, I'm talking about 28% of the growth 28% of the growth of global GDP
So
in
you're
the
talking about
period.
contribution to global GDP growth. Yeah,
Yeah,
obviously,
contribution.
China
Yeah, contribution to global GDP. The
GDP growth.
China surpassed the United States several years back. By purchasing power parity, China is now the biggest
Yeah, it's
economy.
already the biggest, a long time ago.
Sure,
Yeah.
sure. But of course, in dollar terms, the United States is still the biggest. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that they have the economic momentum despite some difficulties, but they're still very far behind militarily. The United States still spends something of the order of $900 billion a year, as opposed to 300 billion the part of China. And the idea that somehow the Chinese are beginning to catch up is I, I don't think that's going to happen before the half the second half of the 21st century.
Walden,
But I guess
but Walden,
I guess
China
yeah.
is not a global military power, so they can concentrate that 300 billion. In fact, if you use purchasing power parity, China probably spends close to 600, 700
Sure.
billion. they can concentrate that in our region, right? Because
Sure,
we're
sure.
their backyard.
Yeah, of course. But again, you've got to look at that, because the United States has devoted so much to the military. It's so far advanced. We're just okay. Just take a look at their aircraft carriers. China has the United States has 11 carrier task forces, all state of the art. China has about three carriers, um, and they're of 1970s Soviet design. And no, aircraft carriers are very important because of the way that their offensive naval capabilities, which is very important in the Western Pacific. Okay, so that's not there. But at the same time, we're looking at, as you said, China considers the Asia Pacific its sphere of influence. Now, China, Trump is a dealer, right? A wheeler dealer. And he it has to come to his recognition, that from a natural geographic or geopolitical point of view, this is, China, is dominant in the area, and that any effort to match China's um, um, uh, dominance is going to be quite futile. Are you there, Richard? Yes.
Yes, yes,
Uh,
I'm there.
yes. Yeah. So basically, what I'm trying to say is that, are we facing a period of selective engagement with the United States? Because what we had with Biden and Obama and Clinton, and even before that, was the United States was engaged everywhere. And this is the reason that it frittered away its power. But I think what you're now seeing is that you have somebody who is more inclined to a spheres of influence sort of thing. Like, let me just give you two examples. I think one is when it comes to Eastern Europe, I think Trump's tendency will be to just grant that as the Soviet sphere of or Russian sphere of influence. Uh, I don't think he's going to push for the expansion of NATO. I think, if anything, there'll be much less commitment to NATO. And when you come to the Western Pacific, here's where I think that Trump will be looking for a deal with Korea, North Korea, and a deal with China. Now, what that will mean is up in the air. It's quite unpredictable at this point in time. But I guess what I'm trying to say is, that whether we like it or not, the fact that Southeast Asia and the Asia Pacific up to Northeast Asia will become more and more and more China's sphere of influence, barring a major uh, war, is, I think, yeah, probably it's going to go that way. So those are the constraints that U.S. power is facing at this point in time.
Well, then perhaps my divergence from your take on this is on two levels. On one level, I think people like John Mersheimer kind of got it. Like Mersheimer's idea is that, Ukraine, the Middle East, among other things. I mean, these are areas that, of course, are very important to the United States, and the U.S. wants to remain dominant in the three areas of East Asia, Persian Gulf, and Europe for obvious reasons, right? Of the industry, the technology, resources. But of these three regions, obviously it's East Asia, which is the most important by far in the 21st century, because this is where the concentration of population and growth and increasing the technological capacity is. Just like Japan, Korea, Taiwan, and China together. I mean, Taiwan alone is 90% of global high-end semiconductor production, right? ASEAN is coming on board, and India. So my first one is that I my sense is there will be some degree of retrenchment, but it will be selective retrenchment, meaning a bit back from Europe, a bit back from the Middle East, like let the Israelis and the Europeans take care of those areas. But I just have a hard time seeing the US also giving up Asia because the stakes here is much higher, which brings me to the second level. I also see a hard time, Walden, and I hope you also consider this point of view, that the Indias and the Japans and Australias and all of these countries will want China to be the dominant force. I mean, I was just in New Delhi the other week and the Japan India Forum, and it was really about Japan and India trying to recruit other middle powers of Vietnam, some a country you're very
Mhm.
familiar with, because Vietnam doesn't want to be also in China's sphere of
Sure,
influence.
sure.
So I think what we're looking at here is the possibility that the Modis and I don't know Ishiba, whoever
Yeah,
is, or will try to schmooze with Trump and say, okay, Trump, I get it if you don't want to help Ukraine anymore. I get it if you just want to outsource to Israel, whatever you want to do in the Middle East. But come
sure,
on, this region, man, we don't want China in charge. This region is too important. Let's work together. We'll pitch in more. So that's my sense, whereby I feel that Trump may have a kind of a universal isolationist sensibility, but structurally it will be much more difficult to withdraw from our
sure.
region
Yeah.
than Europe and
Mm,
the Middle East. Ukraine will be the
sure,
one by comparison, I would say.
sure. I think, let me just put it this way. I think clearly uh, South America and North America, will be definitely the US sphere of influence under Trump. Okay. So, and it's going to be worse for Cuba. It's going to be worse for Venezuela and many other countries in terms of US influence. But so the Monroe Doctrine is going to be restated several times. But I think countries like Korea and and Japan and India are looking for at this point is how do they accommodate China's power? Um, if in fact they cannot rely on the United States that much anymore. Because in fact, the key word that came out of the first Trump administration and what is coming out now is that he's unpredictable. You can't predict what he's gonna do. Yeah. So I think
He's
the signing of
predictably unpredictable. He's
sure,
predictable.
sure. Well, just the signing of this Philippine Japan agreement, in terms of hosting
Colossus.
militaries, has a lot to do with Japan looking at, hey, what do we need at this point if the United States, can't be relied on? I mean, we have to rely on all these other powers. So I think what you will see is a politics of accommodation on the part of Korea, on the part of Japan, on the part of India, rather than a policy of confrontation with China. So at the level of the economics, I think the integration into China's economy is going to be faster than with respect to the politics or to the military. Okay. So, but nevertheless, the trend is going to be towards the natural, kind of dominance that has been geopolitically exerted by the Asian landmass, in this case, China, uh, in the region. So basically, I think that what we're seeing is going to be although the United States under Trump will continue to have the rhetoric about being engaged in the region, that it will be, it will show what's the trend will be uh, increasing disengagement by the United States. Of course, this won't happen in a day, but nevertheless, I think this is going to be the trend with respect to the region. So that's why that's why I think that we have to separate the rhetoric of Trump appointees uh, from the instincts, the isolationist instincts, and the isolationist base of Trump. So that's why I'm saying that we're entering a real period of fluidity that has definitely an impact on the Marcos Duterte conflict. So yes, I grant that I think the Marcoses are now trying to find a way to be able to hook up with the Trump people, but uh, how successful they will be in that, in terms of getting the same level of support that they got from Biden, I have serious doubts about that at this point in time, and that is the one that's giving the the Duterte forces encouragement, not so much the idea that they're both populist, they're both fascist, they're both given to this tendency to whatever. It's more like the fluidity that is being injected by the Trump transition. that they're trying to maneuver, just as the palace at this point is trying to maneuver uh, in terms of how do they get on the good side of Trump. So that's really the fluidity that I'm talking about at this point.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, I think many people are sensing an open here. That's what disruption brings, right? It brings a sense of possibility, right? And
Mhm.
it can obviously, cut both ways. Um, I'm still amazed at how much you believe Trump's ability to defy the industrial military complex in the United States. Don't you think that those guys who are invested in an anti-China policy think tank, and because I talk to folks from the Heritage Foundation, conservative think tanks who are very influential in the Trump administration, all of them are pretty much invested in the anti-China one. So you're confident that Trump and, I don't know, JD Van can defy all of these people? That the deep state will be defeated, if I can put it that way. I mean, they're not even deep state, but I'm just putting it in a catch-all phrase.
Well, remember that Trump eh, has something to settle with the military. Okay, uh, he doesn't like the fact that a number of the people that he appointed, like the former chief of staff Mark Milley, turned against him. He doesn't like the fact that all of these military people, started calling him a fascist. And in fact, he said that a guy like Milley, should be put on trial for treason and executed. Okay, so I guess what I'm trying to say is that there's really no love lost uh, between
Trump and the
some
general.
of the people and the people in the military. So I'm you know it- because the way that Trump look at these people is that they sabotage his first term when it came to foreign and defense policy. They're the ones who prevented him, who tried to prevent him from crossing into North Korea. They're the ones that basically refused to deploy U.S. troops in the streets of the United States during the Black Lives Matter. So I don't think we can assume that, in fact, uh, Trump's rhetoric about the deep state has become more and more volatile. Okay, so I guess I'm trying to say here that we should not expect that the people like Vance and Trump, in terms of who they listen to, will necessarily kowtow to the defense establishment. So, people used to say that Trump's foreign policy had in his first term was irrational, illogical, etc., etc. But in fact, that was Trump's foreign policy that was being undermined by, in fact, the deep state and all these different forces that Trump has identified, which is the reason why he's now put um, loyalists in command of the FBI, and other of the security agencies. Now, all I'm trying to say here is that let's not assume that the deep state is going to be in command this time around. I think Trump learned from the first administration how they could derail his policies, and I think he's probably not going to allow that again. But again, these are just some of the factors
Yeah, I
that
mean, these
enter
are
into the
these are
situation.
perhaps the best known unknowns, right? Or my point is,
Mhm.
obviously we didn't talk also about Elon Musk, who could also play a very important, quote unquote, moderating voice on foreign policy.
Mhm.
Uh, Elon Musk may have, I mean, allegedly he had a meeting with the Iranian ambassador to the United Nations early on in order to de-escalate tensions with Iran. We know that he's very interested in mineral resources in Russia, probably also in Iran. These are two very, very
Mhm.
rich countries when it comes to mineral resources. And we know that Tesla wouldn't remain alive if not for its Shanghai, factory. So he's also very deeply invested in
Sure.
China. So we may have also a kind of uh, an oligarchic moderation effect here, right? To
Yeah.
counter the military
Mhm.
defense industrial complex. So in that sense, I agree with you. This is completely unprecedented. We never had the richest man in the world, right, having such a voice in a new government, and that person also invested in the escalating tensions with the three major adversaries of the United States,
Sure.
Russia, Iran, and China. So the Elon factor is very big here. Although then again, well, then we saw what happened with Steve Bannon, right? If you overshadow Trump, you may not last long.
Sure.
So let's say kung
Yeah.
ma-unity din sila. But let's go
Yeah.
back to the Philippines, Walden, and I want to ask you a sociological
Sure.
question here. You know, people say one reason why Marcos Jr. is, perhaps you have a different reading, but one reason why he's very diffident or very, I would say, hesitant to take on the Dutertes, despite everything, is that he's scared that certain religious groups will mobilize in behalf of the Dutertes. At least one of those religious groups semi-indirectly implied that they will mobilize or more if Sara is impeached, right? Um, what is your read of this involvement of these religious groups? Do you think that could contribute to civil strife? Because as we speak, Catholic Church related civil societies are involved, I think, at least in 2 out of 3 impeachment complaints versus Sara
Mhm.
Duterte. As a sociologist, how do you see that perspective? You know, the role of religious institutions in shaping Philippine politics and how that plays into the Duterte-Marcos strife.
Well, I I think that as we've seen, in the case of Kibuloy, okay, that 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 particular religious group, while it might have suffered certain setbacks, continues to be quite influential. Okay, and they have um, boots on the ground, to use a military term. Okay, and there are other religious groups that could also play that role in evangelical sectors. Vis-a-vis the Catholic Church, which has been mainly involved in terms of the liberal side of things. Okay, um, so I I I would say that they can play an important role, but I doubt whether very much they could play the decisive role. For instance, I very much doubt if they'll be able to bring people together in an EDSA type, EDSA 2 or EDSA 3 type of mobilization. I and maybe the reason that they're really hesitating to really push through with that is because they're not sure of their numbers. So I would say that in terms of the conflicts, between the Dutertes and the Marcoses, it's not so much the religious groups, but really the alliances within the elites, the dynastic alliances, the family alliances, and the institutions, the bureaucracy, but in particular the military. And so we need to do a sociology of the Philippine military at this point in time, because certainly I think,
Military relations.
sure, I think in the 6 years that he was president, Duterte cultivated a lot of the top generals and the top officials of the Philippine military. And the military under Marcos used to be basically Ilocano run, right? But I don't think that the dominance of the Ilocano AFP commanders is still holds until today. It might, there might be some appointees that are, in fact, still very much in the um, loyalty to Marcos tradition
Well,
of,
meron yata Ilocanos but based in Davao and Mindanao. Like it's like we had
sure,
like Secretary Lorenzana Ilocano but
yeah,
Bukidnon. And it's like
yeah,
some of those
yeah.
hybrid versions.
So right, that kind of stuff. So I guess that loyalties, I believe, have become more diffuse than during the Marcos Senior era, and I think it's worthwhile to really look at basically these institutional loyalties, because these are what are being played at this point by the two factions.
Now, well, I want to transition to the opposition. I mean, whatever, however way you want to describe it. Obviously, there's the traditional liberal opposition, and then you have, Risa Akbayan, more social democratic or democratic socialist, Stripe, sorry, and then obviously you have the Makabayan bloc, and then there are also other progressive groups, including yours. How do you see things developing for them, and do you think there could be a rupture here? Is there more space for them to mobilize? Should they work together? Because the way I see it, it's not they're still not working together. I mean, I had Franz Castro, for instance, Congressman Franz Castro here on my show, and I said, "Ba't kayo may sarili kayong slate?" Sabi niya, walang umimbita sa amin, so you have to make our own, right? And I was and part of me was thinking, hindi ba dapat nagsama-sama na nga lahat? Because I remember was it last year's Christmas na andun may picture doon, nandun si Lenny, si Risa, si De Lima, si Franz Castro. I mean, Walden, you tell me, why is the Philippine opposition so divided? The left alone is just a splinter of 1,000. It's like a filigrees. I mean, like, what's going on?
Well, I let me just put it this way. I think that the liberal and progressive opposition really has to um, more fully understand the reason that it has been marginalized. Um, I think that's the first thing. Like, they nag-backfire talaga yung during the 2016 elections, the way that the liberals had painted themselves as what they call the gente decente, as opposed to the equivalent of what Hillary Clinton called the deplorables, right? In the Philippines, that really backfired. Basically, what we saw was in fact a populist embrace by lower class, middle class Filipinos of the kind of politics, populist politics that was being promoted by Duterte. And I think why have the big question is, why have Filipinos, in fact, um, moved away from this espousal of traditional liberal values like due process, okay? Uh, and um, uh, good governance, no? Kasi these are good governance, due process, anti-corruption. This is what the yellow, the yellow factions ran for so many years until 2016, and it's still beyond 2016. Okay, so, and I think what has happened there is, that basically the liberal, I'm not talking about the Liberal Party, but the liberal section of the Philippine elite just has not delivered in terms of, equality, in terms of economic development, in terms of social reform. There was a lot of talk about that, but never really delivered. And I think that's why people turned to the Marcoses and to the Dutertes
I
in
want to put
2000,
that, Walden, no, because obviously,
well, 2022. Right.
yeah. So let's first talk about the liberals before we talk about progressives.
Yeah.
So obviously here we are all students of Antonio Gramsci, right? And the whole folks in Italy who were very critical of the liberal state that gave independence to Italy and some modicum of democratic representation, but there was no fundamental change in the political economy, modes of
Mhm.
production, and empowerment of the vast majority of masses in Italy. So when I read Gramsci, which I'm doing again, apparently
Mhm.
it's not only me, even Giorgio Meloni of Italy, the new fascists are also reading Gramsci, is this critic of the limitations of the liberal state, right? So the Edzo Revolution created not a revolutionary state, not a progressive, but created a liberal state. So what you're saying, the problem with the liberals is that the emphasis was on decorum, The emphasis was on procedurality, formal constitutionality, and most importantly, political rights like freedom of expression,
Sure.
assembly, etc. But no fundamental focus on changing conditions of living, working conditions, income, wages, distribution. And I think that is one of the reasons, if not the main reason, that they find themselves so marginalized.
Well, yeah, it's not, I guess that there was a hypocrisy factor because it did say that it was going to address these issues, corruption, agrarian reform, wealth inequality, but it did not deliver. So I think I think it's not so much that they did not promise in these areas, but they did not in fact deliver. So I think it was the
Why didn't they
combination.
deliver? Because my argument is maybe because they don't believe fundamentally in social justice. Because if you really believe in social justice in an economic sense, you would put in the work. I just felt they never put enough work. Just
No,
look at land reform issue,
definitely.
right?
No, definitely. And I just wanted to say here that uh, I was part of the alliance with the Liberal Party back in 2009 to 2015. And we were pushing for agrarian reform that we really needed to complete it. But, it was, the Aquino administration, basically did not back us up. And it was we were pushing for a new agrarian reform law, and that was not there at all. But that's one thing. The other thing is that they just completely bought the neoliberal line about the way that the Philippines should become more market oriented, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Completely sort of revamped the Philippine state so that it became one of the most neoliberal states in the world. And I think the combination of lack of commitment to social justice and buying neoliberalism, the buy into neoliberalism sort of created this sense among people that they were not really being affected by any sort of positive reforms by this liberal administration. So that when Duterte came along and the Marcoses came along a second time, they were ready for the message that the yellows have not delivered and trust us.
Right. I mean, obviously, the hypocrisy is the human part, but for me, I think there's an ideological deficiency with
Sure,
liberalism per
sure.
se. I mean,
Yeah,
it's apparently there's a rot there. The rot there,
yeah,
the blindness to the massive transformation you need on these socioeconomic fronts.
sure,
I won't go as
definitely.
far as saying changing modes of production. That would be a bit too Marxist. But even from a social democratic standpoint, I see huge deficiencies there. Now, obviously, Walden, you made a perfect transition to the final part of our conversation. Let's talk about economics, right? Because I think many of the in the Philippines, when it comes to political sentiments,